The three women's cruel laughter echoed through Azure Skyline Restaurant. Josiah stood frozen, humiliated, his hand clutching his chest. Then, suddenly, the laughter stopped. A deep voice from behind their table asked, "I wasn't aware we were friends." Josiah Gross had been on his feet for 8 hours straight, and his body was beginning to protest. His lower back ached with that familiar, dull throb that came from endless trips between the kitchen and the dining room. His feet burned inside his worn leather shoes, the same pair he'd been wearing for 2 years now, carefully polished each morning to hide the scuffs and creases that betrayed their age. But he couldn't afford new ones. Not yet. Not when every spare dollar was earmarked for something far more important. His mother's medical bill sat on his kitchen table at home like a constant, looming reminder of why he couldn't afford to mess this up. The chemotherapy treatments were draining his savings faster than he could replenish them, and the insurance only covered a fraction of what she needed. So Josiah worked double shifts, sometimes triple, pushing his body past its limits because the alternative, watching his mother suffer without proper care, was unthinkable. Hello, amazing people. Welcome back to Echoverse, the home where forgotten voices find their echo. Before we dive deeper into today's incredible story, kindly hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and comment below where you're watching from. Your support means to us, and it helps us bring you even more exciting stories. Now let's begin. Azure Skyline Restaurant wasn't just any establishment. It was a kind of place where a reservation list stretched months in advance, where a single entree cost more than Josiah made in a day, and where the clientele expected perfection with every breath they took. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered breathtaking views of the city skyline, and the crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over tables draped in pristine white linen. It was beautiful, elegant, and utterly intimidating, especially for someone like Josiah, who wore his anxiety like a second skin. He had always been the nervous type, the kid in school who stammered during presentations, the young man whose hands trembled when he felt eyes on him. Working at Azure Skyline had been supposed to help him grow more confident, to learn how to navigate high-pressure situations with grace. And for the most part, he had improved. He'd learned to smile through the condescension, to nod politely when customers spoke to him like he was invisible, to keep his composure even when his chest felt tight with panic. But today was different. Today, exhaustion had stripped away his usual defenses, leaving him raw and vulnerable. His manager had called him that morning, asking if he could cover another server's shift because they'd called in sick. Josiah wanted to say no. He wanted to say no, but the overtime pay was too tempting to refuse. So here he was, running on 4 hours of sleep and 2 cups of cheap coffee, trying desperately to keep his professional mask in place. He moved through the dining room with practiced efficiency, balancing trays, refilling water glasses, answering questions with the kind of rehearsed politeness that came from months of repetition. But beneath the surface, his mind was racing. He kept thinking about his mother's latest doctor's appointment, about the new treatment plan they discussed, about the crushing weight of responsibility that seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. Josiah paused near the kitchen door, taking a moment to steady himself. He pressed a hand to his chest, feeling his heartbeat thudding against his ribs. "Breathe," he told himself. "Just breathe. You've made it this far. Just a few more hours." He glanced around the restaurant, taking in the scene. Businessmen in expensive suits laughed over cocktails. Couples leaned close across candlelit tables. A group of women in designer clothing occupied the corner booth near the windows, their voices carrying across the room with the kind of confidence that came from never having to worry about money. Josiah straightened his apron, ran a hand through his dark hair, and forced himself to smile. He had a job to do, bills to pay, and a mother who was counting on him. Nothing else mattered. Not his exhaustion, not his anxiety, not the constant fear that one mistake could cost him everything. He picked up another tray and headed back into the fray, unaware that in just a few minutes, his entire world would be turned upside down by three women who viewed his vulnerability as entertainment, and by one man who would prove that dignity was worth fighting for. The laughter started small, like the first crack in a dam before the flood. One of the women, a blonde with sharp cheekbones and eyes like chips of ice, leaned back in her chair and let out a theatrical sigh as Josiah approached their table with the check. "Finally," she said, not to him but to her companions, her voice loud enough to carry to the neighboring tables. "I was beginning to think he'd forgotten about us entirely." The second woman, a brunette with her hair pulled back in a severe bun, smirked. "Maybe he did. He doesn't exactly look like the sharpest knife in the drawer, does he?" Josiah felt heat rise to his cheeks as he placed a leather bill folder on the table, his hands trembling slightly. "Here's your check, ladies. Whenever you're ready, no rush." "Oh, there's definitely a rush," the third woman said, examining her manicured nails with exaggerated boredom. "We have actual important places to be, unlike some people." The blonde picked up the bill folder, glanced at it, then tossed it back onto the table with a dismissive flick of her wrist. "You know what? We're not paying for this." Josiah blinked, certain he'd misheard. "I'm sorry, ma'am." "Are you hard of hearing, too?" the brunette asked, her voice dripping with mock concern. "Or just slow in general?" She said we're not paying. She enunciated each word as if speaking to a child. The women exchanged glances and burst into laughter, the sound sharp and cruel. Josiah stood frozen, his hand instinctively moving to his chest where his heart was hammering against his ribs. He could feel other diners beginning to notice the commotion, heads turning subtly in their direction. "Look at him," the blonde said, pointing at Josiah's trembling hands. "He's actually shaking. Are you scared of us, sweetheart?" No, ma'am, Josiah stammered, trying to find his footing. "It's restaurant policy. All meals must be paid for before." "Before what?" the third woman interrupted, leaning forward with a predatory smile. "Before you have a panic attack? Because it certainly looks like you're about to." The brunette's eyes traveled slowly from Josiah's face down to his feet, her expression twisting into something between amusement and disgust. "Oh my God, look at his shoes. Are those from a thrift store? When was the last time you bought new ones?" 2015. The laughter grew louder, more confident. They were enjoying this now, feeding off each other's cruelty like it was some kind of sport. The blonde pulled out her phone, angling it toward Josiah as if considering whether he was worth photographing. "Honestly, does this restaurant even have standards anymore?" she asked, addressing the question to the room as much as to her friends. "I mean, look at him. He can barely string a sentence together. His clothes look like he slept in them, and those shoes." "Maybe that's why the service was so terrible," the brunette chimed in. "They're hiring charity cases now instead of actual professionals." Josiah felt his throat tighten, his vision beginning to blur at the edges. He'd dealt with difficult customers before, but this was different. This wasn't just rudeness or impatience. This was deliberate, calculated humiliation, performed for an audience. Several other diners were watching now, some with expressions of discomfort, others with curious interest, as if they were witnessing an unexpected dinner theater performance. "Ma'am, please," Josiah managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "I really need you to settle the bill. If there was something wrong with your meal, I can get my manager." "Something wrong?" the blonde repeated, her voice rising in mock indignation. Everything was wrong. The food was mediocre. The ambience is overrated, and the service. She gestured at Josiah with a wave of her hand. "Well, clearly, they're scraping the bottom of the barrel." The third woman leaned back, crossing her arms with satisfaction. "You know what I think? I think someone like you should be grateful we even showed up. People like us keep places like this in business. What do you contribute exactly? Besides nervous energy and cheap footwear. The words hit Josiah like physical blows, each one landing with precision in the places where he was already wounded. Josiah's hand moved to his chest, pressing against his sternum as if it could physically slow the frantic beating of his heart. He could feel it thundering beneath his palm, each pulse sending waves of anxiety through his body. His breathing had become shallow, quick little gasps that weren't bringing in enough air. He recognized the signs. He had panic attacks before, usually late at night when the weight of his mother's medical bills kept him awake, staring at the ceiling in the dark. But he couldn't afford to have one now. Not here. Not in front of these women who were already treating him like he was broken. He closed his eyes for just a moment, trying to remember the techniques his mother had taught him years ago when his anxiety first started manifesting. Count to 4 as you breathe in. Hold for 4. Breathe out for 4. It was supposed to calm the nervous system, to trick the body into believing everything was okay even when it wasn't. "Ma'am," he said, opening his eyes and forcing himself to meet the blonde woman's gaze. His voice came out steadier than he expected, though it still trembled at the edges. "I understand you're unhappy with your experience. I truly apologize if we didn't meet your expectations, but I really do need you to settle the check before you leave." The brunette rolled her eyes dramatically. "Is he serious right now? After everything we just said, he's still going on about the check?" "I think he might actually be slow," the third woman stage whispered, though her voice was loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. "Like genuinely." Josiah felt his face burning, but he kept his hand on his chest, kept trying to breathe. He thought about his mother lying in her hospital bed last week, how she'd held his hand and told him she was proud of him, that he was doing such a good job taking care of her. He thought about the stack of bills on his kitchen table, each one stamped with red letters reminding him of deadlines and consequences. He thought about how desperately he needed this job, how losing it would mean losing everything. "Please," he said, and he hated how the word came out, small and pleading, stripped of any authority or strength. "I'm just trying to do my job. If you refuse to pay, I'll have to cover the bill myself, and I—" He stopped himself, realizing he was sharing too much, revealing vulnerabilities these women would only use as ammunition. But it was too late. The blonde's eyes lit up with interest, sensing fresh territory for mockery. "You have to cover yourself?" she repeated, leaning forward with exaggerated concern. "Oh, that would be tragic, wouldn't it? Given your obvious financial situation." Her gaze swept over him again, taking in every detail of his appearance with cruel precision. "What do you make here? Minimum wage plus tips? Must be tough." "Maybe we should pay," the third woman said, and for a split second, Josiah felt a surge of relief. But then she continued, "We could leave him a $1 tip. That's probably a fortune to someone like him." The laughter erupted again, sharper this time, more vicious. Josiah's hand pressed harder against his chest, his fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt. He could feel sweat forming at his temples, could feel a familiar tightness in his throat that meant tears weren't far behind. He couldn't cry. Not here. If he cried, he'd never recover from the humiliation. "Ladies, please." He tried one more time, his voice cracking. "The total is $347. I'm asking you respectfully to please settle your bills so we can all move on." The brunette picked up her wine glass, still half full, and took a long, deliberate sip, maintaining eye contact with Josiah the entire time. When she set it down, she smiled. "You know what? No, we're not paying." The food was substandard. The service was pathetic, and frankly, we deserve compensation for having to endure this experience. "If anything, you should be paying us," the blonde added. Josiah felt something inside him beginning to crack. His hand remained pressed to his chest, but it wasn't helping anymore. His heart was racing too fast, his thoughts spiraling. He needed to get his manager. He needed backup. But his feet felt rooted to the floor, his body frozen in place by a mixture of fear, humiliation, and sheer exhaustion. The third woman leaned back in her chair with satisfaction. What's wrong? Cat got your tongue? Or are you finally realizing you're in over your head? Josiah's hands clenched into fists at his sides, his fingernails digging into his palms hard enough to leave marks. He could feel every eye in the restaurant on him now, could sense the weight of judgment and pity pressing down on his shoulders. The water continued to spread across the floor, the ice cubes slowly melting into the puddle, and the women sat there like queens on their throne, waiting for him to bow. But he couldn't. Not this time. I'm going to have to get management, he said, his voice stronger now, fueled by a desperate kind of courage born from having nothing left to lose. This situation has escalated beyond what I can handle, and I need someone with more authority to... The blonde woman threw her head back and laughed, the sound echoing through the dining room like breaking glass. Management? Oh, sweetheart, that's precious. That's really, truly precious. The brunette joined in, her laughter high and mocking. Go ahead. Call management. Please do. We'd love to have a conversation with them about how their staff has been treating us. About how you've harassed us, the third woman added, pointing an accusatory finger at Josiah. About how you made us feel unwelcome and uncomfortable in what's supposed to be a 5-star establishment. Josiah felt his stomach drop. They were going to twist this, going to make him a villain in a story they'd been writing since the moment he approached their table. That's not. I haven't harassed anyone. You've been refusing to pay your bill and you've been aggressive and demanding, the blonde interrupted smoothly. You've raised your voice. You've made us feel threatened, and quite honestly, we're considering whether we should file a formal complaint. Or maybe even call the police, the brunette said thoughtfully, examining her nails. I mean, is it legal to force customers to pay for food they didn't enjoy? That sounds like extortion to me. Josiah's breath caught in his throat. Police? Complaint? This was spiraling so far out of control that he couldn't even process it. His mind raced, trying to find solid ground in a situation that had become completely untethered from reality. You know what? The blonde said, leaning forward with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I don't think you understand who you're dealing with. We're not just random customers off the street. We have connections. Serious connections. That's right, the third woman chimed in. We're personal friends with Jameson Lewis. You know who that is, don't you? The owner of this restaurant? The billionaire who signed your pathetic little paychecks. Josiah felt ice water rush through his veins. Jameson Lewis was a name spoken with reverence at Azure Skyline, a figure who existed somewhere in the stratosphere above the daily operations of the restaurant. Josiah had never met him, had only seen him once from a distance when he'd visited the restaurant months ago. The man was a legend in the hospitality industry, someone whose approval could make a career and whose disapproval could end one. Jameson is a very close friend of ours, the brunette continued, her voice dripping with satisfaction. We've known him for years. We vacationed together. Our families are connected. So when you go running to management, when you tell them your little sob story about how 3 innocent women refuse to pay for terrible food and worse service, just remember that we have the owner's direct line on speed dial. The blonde pulled out her phone, waving it in the air. 1 call. That's all it would take. 1 call to Jameson, and you'd be clearing out your locker before the lunch rush ends. He trusts us, the third woman said. He values our opinion. And right now, our opinion is that you're incompetent, unprofessional, and a liability to this establishment. Josiah's world tilted on its axis. If they really were friends with Jameson Lewis, if they really did have that kind of influence, then he was finished. Everything he'd worked for, Every double shift he'd suffered through, every moment of swallowed pride. All be for nothing. His mother's medical bills would pile up unpaid. He'd lose the apartment. Everything would collapse. "So here's what's going to happen," the blonde said, her voice taking on a razor's edge. "You're going to clean up this mess. You're going to apologize for your appalling behavior. And then you're going to walk away and let us leave without paying a cent. And if you're very, very lucky, we might not mention this incident to Jameson when we see him this weekend." The restaurant had gone quiet in a way that felt almost unnatural, as if someone had turned down the volume on reality itself. The usual sounds, the soft clink of silverware against china, the murmur of polite conversation, the gentle jazz playing through hidden speakers, all of it seemed to fade into the background, replaced by a heavy anticipatory silence. Josiah stood frozen, the women's threats still ringing in his ears. His mind scrambled for a response, for any words that might salvage the situation, but came up empty. How could he fight against people who claimed to have the owner himself in their corner? What defense did someone like him have against that kind of power? The blonde woman was still holding her phone, still wearing that triumphant smile that made Josiah's stomach churn. "Nothing to say now?" "I thought not. You know you're beat." But something strange was happening. Josiah noticed it first in his peripheral vision, a subtle shift in the atmosphere of the room. At the table to his left, an elderly couple had stopped eating mid-bite, their forks suspended in the air, their eyes fixed on something behind the women. At the bar, two businessmen had turned completely around on their stools, drinks forgotten. A young woman near the window had her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with what looked like a mixture of shock and anticipation. Everyone was looking at something. Everyone except the three women, who were too absorbed in their performance to notice. Josiah's gaze lifted slowly, following the collective attention of the room, and his heart nearly stopped. Standing directly behind the women's table, so close he could have reached out and touched the back of the blonde woman's chair, was a man in a navy blazer and light blue shirt. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with silver-gray hair that caught the afternoon light streaming through the windows. His face was weathered but distinguished, with sharp cheekbones and a strong jaw. But it was his eyes that commanded attention, piercing, intelligent, and at this moment cold as winter steel. Jameson Lewis. The owner stood with his hands clasped loosely in front of him, his posture relaxed, but somehow radiating an authority that needed no announcement. His expression was carefully neutral, but there was something in the set of his mouth, the slight furrow of his brow, that suggested he was exercising considerable restraint. He wasn't looking at Josiah. He was looking at the back of the women's heads, his gaze so intense it seemed impossible they couldn't feel it burning into them. How long had he been standing there? How much had he heard? Josiah's mind raced, trying to calculate when the owner might have arrived. Had he been there since the beginning? Had he witnessed the entire humiliating spectacle? The realization hit Josiah like a physical blow. This powerful man, this billionaire who held Josiah's entire future in his hands, had watched him be reduced to nothing by these women, who now claimed to be his close personal friends. The brunette was still talking, oblivious. Honestly, if you had any intelligence at all, you'd realize you've already lost this fight. People like you don't win against people like us. That's just how the world works. A young waitress near the kitchen door had gone pale, her tray clutched against her chest as she stared at Jameson Lewis. The bartender had stopped pouring mid-drink, letting the liquid overflow slightly before catching himself. Even the chef had emerged from the kitchen, standing in the doorway with his arms crossed, watching the scene unfold with rapt attention. Everyone knew. Everyone could see what was about to happen. Everyone except the three women who had spent the last 20 minutes systematically destroying a young man's dignity while invoking the name of the very person who now stood in judgment behind them. Jameson Lewis's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. A muscle twitched near his temple. His hands, still clasped in front of him, pressed together more firmly. But he didn't move. He didn't speak. He simply stood there, a silent sentinel of justice, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal himself. The third woman noticed Josiah's expression first. His face had gone from defeated to something else, something that looked almost like hope mixed with terror. His eyes were fixed on a point directly behind her, and the look on his face made her pause. "What are you staring at?" she demanded, starting to turn in her chair, probably daydreaming about how he's going to explain this to his manager. The blonde said dismissively, "Don't worry, sweetheart. We'll explain it for you. We'll make sure Jameson knows exactly what kind of employees he's." The blonde woman's voice trailed off mid-sentence as she finally noticed what everyone else in the restaurant had been watching for the past minute. The ambient noise, the collective held breath of dozens of diners, the way the staff had frozen in place. Something was wrong. Something had shifted. She turned slowly in her chair, her smile still in place but beginning to falter at the edges. The brunette and the third woman turned with her, following her gaze upward to the tall figure standing directly behind their table. For a moment, nobody moved. The three women stared up at Jameson Lewis, recognition dawning on their faces in slow, horrifying stages. Their expressions shifted from confusion to recognition to dawning comprehension to absolute horror in the space of 3 heartbeats. The color drained from the blonde woman's face so quickly it looked like someone had pulled a plug. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The silence stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap. Jameson Lewis didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. When he spoke, his words cut to the quiet with the precision of a surgical blade, each syllable measured and deliberate. "I wasn't aware we were friends." The statement hung in the air, simple and devastating. His tone was conversational, almost curious, as if he were genuinely puzzled by this revelation about his own social circle. But there was steel underneath, cold and unyielding. The blonde woman's hand flew to her throat, an unconscious gesture of shock. Her expensive bracelet caught the light as her arm trembled. "Mr. Lewis," she breathed. The name coming out is barely more than a whisper. We didn't. "You didn't see me standing here," Jameson finished for her, his expression unchanging. "Yes, I gathered that. You've been rather occupied for the past several minutes." The brunette had gone absolutely rigid in her chair, her spine straight as a board, her hands gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles had turned white. The wine stains on the tablecloth seemed to glow accusingly between her fingers. "Mr. Lewis, this isn't. There's been a misunderstanding." "Has there?" Jameson took a single step forward, coming around the side of their table, so they could see him fully without craning their necks. He moved with unhurried grace, a man who had all the time in the world because time, like everything else, bent his will. Because from where I was standing, everything seemed quite clear. The third woman tried to arrange her face into something resembling a smile, but it came out as more of a grimace. We were having a discussion with your employee about the quality of service, and you were humiliating him," Jameson said flatly, cutting through her attempted spin with brutal honesty. "You spilled water on my floor deliberately. You mocked his appearance, his anxiety, his financial situation. You threatened him with termination while claiming to be my personal friends." He paused, letting each accusation land like a hammer blow. "Which part did I misunderstand?" The blonde woman's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, like a fish pulled from water. Her eyes darted around the restaurant, perhaps looking for an escape route, perhaps hoping this was all some terrible nightmare she might wake from. But everywhere she looked, she found only the stares of other diners, witnesses to her humiliation just as Josiah had been a witness to theirs. "How long were you standing there?" the brunette asked, her voice cracking on the last word. Jameson's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, something that might have been grim satisfaction. "Long enough," he said simply. "I heard about friends vacationing together, about families being connected, about weekend plans." He tilted his head slightly, studying in the way an entomologist might study pinned insects. "Fascinating, considering I've never seen any of you before in my life." The third woman made a small, desperate sound in the back of her throat. "We didn't mean. We were just trying to—" "To what?" Jameson's voice sharpened for the first time, not quite rising in volume, but taking on an edge that made several nearby diners flinch. "To intimidate a young man who was simply trying to do his job? To use my name as a weapon against someone who has no power to defend himself? To turn human dignity into entertainment?" The blonde woman had begun to cry, actual tears streaking through her carefully applied makeup. "Please, Mr. Lewis, if you'll just let us explain." "I don't want your explanations," Jameson said, and now his voice had gone quiet again, which somehow made it even more terrifying. "I heard everything I needed to hear. I saw everything I needed to see." He glanced toward Josiah, who still stood frozen several feet away, his hand pressed against his chest, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. "This young man asked you politely multiple times to simply pay for your meal. That's all. Just basic human decency. And you responded by systematically attempting to destroy him." The brunette's tears had started now too, though she tried to hide them by looking down at her lap. "We'll pay," she said desperately. "We'll pay right now. We'll leave whatever tip you want. We'll—" "You misunderstand," Jameson interrupted, and there was something almost gentle in his tone now, the gentleness of an executioner explaining the process to the condemned. "I'm not interested in your money." The three women looked up at him with identical expressions of confusion and dawning horror. "You claimed the food was substandard," Jameson continued, his hands clasped loosely behind his back now, his posture that of a professor delivering a lecture. "You said the service was terrible. You indicated that being here was such an ordeal that you deserve compensation rather than being asked to pay." He paused. "So I'm going to take you at your word." "What do you mean?" the third woman whispered. Jameson's eyes were ice. "I mean you're not paying for your meal. Not because I'm being generous, but because I don't want your business." Jameson Lewis turned slightly, extending a hand toward Josiah in a gesture that was both protective and inclusive. He didn't touch the young man, but the movement was deliberate, drawing everyone's attention to the person who had been the target of so much cruelty. "This young man," Jameson said, his voice carrying across the now silent restaurant, "has shown more class in the last 20 minutes than the three of you have demonstrated in your entire lives, I suspect." The blonde woman opened her mouth to protest, but Jameson held up a hand, silencing her without a word. "Class," he continued, and there was something almost philosophical in his tone now, as if he were sharing a truth he'd learned over decades of building his empire, is not about the car you drive, or the watch you wear, or the size of your bank account. Those are just things, accessories. Any fool with a credit card can acquire them. He took a step closer to Josiah, and the young waiter seemed to stand a little straighter, though his hand remained pressed against his chest, his breathing still uneven. "True class is revealed in how you treat people who can do nothing for you," Jameson said. "It's measured in how you speak to servers, to janitors, to anyone whose position is beneath your own, because that's when your character shows itself. When there's no benefit to being kind, no audience to impress, no advantage to be gained, that's when you learn who someone really is." The brunette had her face in her hands now, her shoulders shaking. The third woman stared at the table, unable to meet anyone's eyes. But the blonde still had some fight left in her, some desperate need to salvage something from this wreckage. "Mr. Lewis, we made a mistake," she said, her voice thick with tears. "We had a bad day. We weren't thinking clearly. You weren't thinking clearly? Jameson's eyebrows rose slightly. Is that what we're calling it? Because from where I stood, your thinking seemed perfectly clear. You saw someone vulnerable, someone anxious, someone who couldn't fight back, and you decided to make him your entertainment. He walked over to where the water still pooled on the floor, the ice cubes now mostly melted. He looked down at it, then back at the women. You poured this deliberately, he said. Not because you were clumsy, not because you were careless, but because you wanted to humiliate him further. You wanted to see him on his hands and knees, scrubbing your mess while you laughed. His voice had gone quiet again, but the anger beneath it was palpable. That wasn't a bad day. That was cruelty. Calculated, intentional cruelty. Josiah made a small sound, almost like a gasp, and Jameson glanced at him with an expression that might have been concern. The young man's eyes were wide, disbelieving, as if he couldn't quite process that someone was defending him, that this nightmare was actually ending in his favor. "Mr. Gross here," Jameson said, and Josiah startled slightly at hearing his name spoken by the owner. "Works double shifts to pay for his mother's medical treatment. Did you know that? Did you care?" The three women said nothing, their silence an admission of guilt. "He comes in early, stays late, never complains," Jameson continued. "My managers tell me he's one of the most reliable people on staff. Kind to customers, helpful to co-workers, always professional even when he's exhausted." He paused. "And today, you tried to break him. For what? For sport? Because you could." The blonde woman's tears were flowing freely now, her mascara running in dark streaks down her cheeks. "We're sorry," she whispered. "We're so sorry." "I'm not the one you need to apologize to," Jameson said sharply. He turned to face Josiah fully now, and then looked back at the three women. "Stand up." The women exchanged panicked glances. "I said stand up," Jameson repeated, his voice leaving no room for negotiation. Slowly, shakily, the three women rose from their chairs. They stood awkwardly, their expensive clothes and perfect hair suddenly seeming ridiculous in the context of their humiliation. The blonde's legs were visibly trembling. The brunette kept her eyes fixed on the floor. The third woman looked like she might be sick. "Turn around," Jameson instructed. "Face him." They turned, forming an awkward line facing Josiah, who stood several feet away looking utterly overwhelmed. His hand had finally fallen from his chest, but his arms hung at his sides uselessly, as if he'd forgotten what to do with them. "Now apologize," Jameson said. "Not to me, to him. And make it sincere, because everyone in this restaurant is listening." The silence that followed was excruciating. The blonde woman took a shuddering breath, wiping at her face with the back of her hand, smearing her makeup further. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry for how we treated you. It was cruel and wrong, and you didn't deserve any of it." The brunette followed, her words coming out in a rush. "I apologize for everything we said. The things about your appearance, your anxiety, all of it. It was horrible. You were just doing your job and we—" Her voice cracked. "We were horrible." The third woman could barely speak through her tears. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please forgive us." Josiah stood there, staring at them, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, finally, he gave a single, small nod. Not acceptance, perhaps, but acknowledgement. It was more grace than they deserved. Jameson watched this exchange with satisfaction, then turned back to the women. "Now leave," he said simply, "and don't come back." The three women didn't argue. They didn't try to negotiate or plead for another chance. They simply gathered their belongings with trembling hands, designer purses, expensive coats, phones that threatened such power just minutes ago, and moved toward the exit with their heads bowed low. The blonde stumbled slightly in her heels, catching herself on a nearby chair. The brunette had wrapped her arms around herself as if trying to become smaller, invisible. The third woman kept her gaze fixed firmly on the floor, navigating by memory rather than sight. As they passed through the restaurant, their shame seemed to ripple outward like a physical force. Diners who had been watching with rapt attention now looked away, offering them the same courtesy they had denied Josiah, the mercy of not bearing witness to their complete humiliation. But the difference was palpable. This wasn't kindness. It was discomfort. The collective awkwardness of watching justice being served in a form so raw and public that it made everyone uneasy. The door chimed softly as they pushed through it and disappeared onto the street. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Josiah could see them standing on the sidewalk for a moment, clustered together like survivors of shipwreck, before they scattered in different directions, each woman fleeing alone into the afternoon crowd. The restaurant remained silent for several heartbeats after they left. Then, slowly, like the first stirrings of life after a storm, sound began to return. Someone cleared their throat. Silverware clinked against china. A glass was set down on a table. And then, from somewhere near the back, a single person began to clap. Others joined in, the applause building gradually until it filled the entire dining room. It wasn't thunderous or overwhelming, but it was genuine, a collective acknowledgement of what they had witnessed, a show of solidarity for the young man who had endured so much. Josiah stood frozen, his face flushing with a mixture of embarrassment and something else he couldn't quite name. Relief, perhaps. Validation. The vindication of knowing that he hadn't been wrong, that he hadn't deserved what happened to him. Jameson Lewis let the applause continue for a moment before raising his hand slightly, a subtle gesture that brought the restaurant back to its normal rhythm. The clapping faded. Conversations resumed, and the business of lunch continued as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. But something had changed in the air, a shift in energy that everyone could feel even if they couldn't articulate it. Jameson turned to Josiah, and for the first time since he revealed himself, his expression softened. The cold steel in his eyes melted into something warmer, more human. He reached out and placed a hand on Josiah's shoulder, the touch firm and reassuring. "Walk with me for a moment," he said quietly, his voice meant only for Josiah's ears. Josiah nodded mutely, his throat too tight to speak. Jameson guided him gently away from the table with the spilled water, away from the curious eyes of the remaining diners, toward a quieter corner of the restaurant near the windows. The city stretched out below them, indifferent to the small drama that had just unfolded. "How long have you worked here, Josiah?" Jameson asked, his hand still resting on the young man's shoulder. 8 months, Josiah managed, his voice hoarse. 8 months and 2 weeks. Jameson nodded slowly. "And in that time, how many incidents like this have you endured?" Josiah hesitated, unsure how honest he should be. But something in Jameson's eyes, a genuine interest, a real concern, made him tell the truth. "Not like this exactly. But people can be difficult, demanding, sometimes cruel. It's part of the job, I thought." "It shouldn't be," Jameson said firmly. "Yes, hospitality requires patience. Yes, you'll encounter challenging customers. But what happened today crossed every line. You understand that, don't you?" Josiah nodded, feeling tears prickling at the corners of his eyes. He blinked rapidly, trying to hold them back. "You could have fought back," Jameson continued, his voice thoughtful. "You could have raised your voice, been rude in return, walked away and let them leave without paying. No one would have blamed you, but you didn't. You kept trying to be professional even when they were systematically trying to destroy you." "I need this job," Josiah said simply, and the words came out broken, heavy with all the weight they carried. My mother, her treatments, I can't afford to lose this position. Jameson's expression shifted, something like pain flickering across his features. His hand tightened slightly on Josiah's shoulder. I know about your mother. I make it my business to know about the people who work for me, especially the ones my managers speak highly of. Josiah looked up sharply, surprise cutting through his emotional fog. I know you work double shifts, Jameson continued. I know about the medical bills. I know you've never been late, never called in sick even when you probably should have, never complained about the most difficult assignments. He paused. I know you're drowning, Josiah, and I watched you nearly go under today because of 3 people who have probably never struggled for anything in their lives. A tear escaped down Josiah's cheek. Before he could stop it, he wiped it away quickly, embarrassed. Don't, Jameson said gently. You've earned the right to cry if you need to. God knows I wanted to punch a wall after some of the things I heard today. Despite everything, Josiah felt a small, watery laugh escape. The absurdity of hearing a billionaire admit to wanting to punch a wall on his behalf was somehow grounding. Jameson reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card, holding it between 2 fingers. I want you to come to my office tomorrow morning. 10 o'clock. We need to talk about your future here. Josiah's stomach dropped. Are you firing me? What? No, Jameson said, looking genuinely shocked. No, Josiah. The opposite, actually. The next morning, Josiah stood outside the executive offices on the top floor of the Azure Skyline building, his reflection staring back at him from the polished glass doors. He'd barely slept the night before, his mind replaying the events of yesterday on an endless loop. The cruelty of the women, the humiliation, and then Jameson Lewis appearing like some avenging angel to set everything right. He'd called his mother from the staff break room after his shift ended, his voice still shaky as he told her what had happened. She cried with him, her weak voice filled with pride and relief. You stood your ground, baby, she whispered. You didn't let them break you. Now, wearing his best shirt, still not expensive but clean and pressed, Josiah pushed through the glass doors into a world he'd never expected to enter. The reception area was stunning, all marble and chrome with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the city. A young woman at the desk smiled warmly when he gave his name, as if she'd been expecting him. Mr. Lewis is ready for you, she said, gesturing toward a heavy wooden door. Go right in. Jameson's office was smaller than Josiah had imagined, more intimate. Books lined one wall. Framed photographs covered another. Images of restaurants, staff gatherings, moments of celebration. Jameson himself stood by the window, hands in his pockets, watching the city below. He turned when Josiah entered, his face breaking into a genuine smile. Josiah, come in, please. Sit. He gestured to a comfortable leather chair across from his desk. Josiah sat, his hands folded in his lap, to keep them from trembling. Jameson settled into his own chair, leaning forward with his elbows on the desk, his expression serious but kind. I've been thinking about you all night, Jameson began. About what you endured yesterday, about your situation with your mother, about the kind of character it takes to maintain dignity under that kind of assault. He paused. I want to offer you something, but I need you to understand it's not charity. This is about recognizing talent and integrity when I see it. Josiah's heart hammered in his chest. I'm promoting you to junior dining room manager, Jameson said. It comes with significant salary increase, better hours, and full health benefits that will cover both you and your mother. Josiah's breath caught. Mr. Lewis, I don't know what to say. I've never managed anything before. You managed yesterday? Jameson interrupted gently. Under impossible circumstances, you managed to keep your composure, to try to do your job, to maintain your humanity when 3 people were actively trying to strip it from you. That's the kind of management skill I need, the ability to stay grounded when everything is falling apart. Tears welled in Josiah's eyes again, but this time he didn't try to hide them. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you so much." Jameson reached across the desk, extending his hand. Josiah took it, the handshake firm and meaningful, not employer to employee, but one person recognizing another's worth. "There's one more thing," Jameson said, releasing Josiah's hand and opening a drawer in his desk. He pulled out an envelope and slid it across the polished surface. "This is a personal contribution toward your mother's medical expenses. It's not a loan. Consider it an investment in the kind of person I want representing my company." Josiah opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a check that made his vision blur. It was enough to cover 6 months of his mother's treatments, maybe more. Enough to let him breathe for the first time in years. "I can't accept this," Josiah said automatically, even as everything in him screamed to take it, to run to the hospital and pay off the mounting bills that haunted his dreams. "You can and you will," Jameson said firmly, "because yesterday taught both of us something important. Those women believed that money and status gave them the right to treat others as less than human. They were wrong. Money is just a tool, Josiah. What matters is what you build with it, the lives you improve, the dignity you protect, the justice you serve." Josiah clutched the envelope to his chest, the same gesture he'd made yesterday when his heart had been racing with fear. But now it raced with something else entirely. Hope, gratitude, the overwhelming relief of knowing that sometimes, just sometimes, doing the right thing was rewarded. "I won't let you down," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I know you won't," Jameson replied, "because that's not who you are." Thank you for watching. Stay tuned to Echoverse as we bring you more incredible stories.